been threatening Seoul for 3 days. Tonight it finally broke. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the private estate in Hanam-dong, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in South Korea. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a bedroom that most people would never see, a sanctuary of dark wood, minimalist furniture and shadows that seemed to breathe. Inside, the most feared man in Korea finally slept. Kwon Tae-gun hadn't closed his eyes in 72 hours. Business. Betrayals. The weight of an empire built on blood and silence. But tonight exhaustion had claimed him. Zamora Obi sat in the chair beside his bed. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was only in Seoul because of her sister Amarachi, who worked in Taegun's legitimate corporate holdings. A family emergency had brought Zamora from Lagos 3 weeks ago, and somehow inexplicably she had found herself pulled into the orbit of a man who terrified everyone around him. But not her. Not entirely. Lightning flashed. The room glowed white. And then she heard it. A whisper. Soft. Broken. Almost like a prayer. Amarachi. Zamora's heart stopped. She leaned closer, certain she had imagined it. But then he said it again. Amarachi, don't. His voice cracked on the word. Pain. Raw, undeniable pain. Zamora's hands trembled in her lap. Her sister's name. He was dreaming about her sister. Whispering her name like she was something precious. Something lost. Something loved. The storm raged outside, but inside Zamora, everything went silent. He understood now. She understood why Amarachi never talked about her work. Why she was always so careful when Taegun's name came up. Why she deflected every question with a practiced smile. Her sister and this man. Well, she couldn't think about it. Couldn't stay. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept over Seoul's skyline, Zamora Obi was gone. No note. No goodbye. No trace. What nobody knew, what even she didn't fully understand, was that her disappearance was about to become the one thing the most feared mafia boss in Korea could not control. Please like, share and subscribe. And comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has traveled. 3 weeks earlier, Zamora had arrived in Seoul with a single suitcase and a heart full of worry. The call from Amarachi had come at 2 in the morning, Lagos time. Her older sister's voice had been steady, it always was, but Zamora had heard the tremor beneath the calm. I need you here, Z. Just for a little while. Something's happened and I can't explain it over the phone. Zamora hadn't asked questions. She never did when it came to Amarachi. Her sister had practically raised her after their parents died, had sacrificed everything to ensure Zamora finished school, found her passion in illustration, built a life that wasn't defined by grief. So when Amarachi called, Zamora came. The apartment in Gangnam was smaller than she'd expected. Amarachi had described her life in Seoul as comfortable, successful, the culmination of years of hard work climbing the corporate ladder of a major investment firm. But the apartment told a different story. Sparse furniture, minimal decorations, a lived-in feeling that suggested someone who spent more time at work than at home. It's temporary, Amarachi had said, watching Zamora survey the space. I've been so busy. Haven't had time to really settle in. But Zamora noticed things. He always had. It was what made her a good illustrator. The ability to see what others missed, to capture the details that revealed truth. She noticed the tension in Amarachi's shoulders. The way her sister's eyes darted to her phone every few minutes. The dark circles that no amount of makeup could fully hide. What's really going on? Zamora had asked on the 3rd night, after Amarachi came home at nearly midnight, still in her corporate attire, still carrying the weight of something she wouldn't name. Amarachi had paused at the kitchen counter, her back to her sister. Work complications. It'll pass. Alma. Don't. Her sister's voice had sharpened. Then softer, please see. Just trust me. I'll explain everything when I can. But she never did. The weeks passed and Zamora learned to navigate Seoul alone. She worked on her illustrations from the apartment, took long walks through neighborhoods she couldn't pronounce, ate at small restaurants where the owners communicated through smiles and gestures when her limited Korean failed her. And she learned about Kwon Tae-gun. Not from Amarachi, who still deflected every question about her employer. But from the internet. From whispered conversations she overheard when she visited Amarachi's office. From the way people's faces changed when his name was mentioned. On the surface he was a business mogul, founder and CEO of Kwon Holdings, a conglomerate with interests in real estate, technology, and international trade. Philanthropist. Art collector. One of the most eligible bachelors in Korea, though he rarely appeared at social events and never with a woman on his arm. But beneath the surface the stories were darker. The ghost of Seoul they called him. A man who controlled things that never appeared in business journals. A man whose enemies had a habit of disappearing. A man who answered to no one. Zamora had studied his photographs online, trying to understand why her sister had chosen to work for someone so dangerous. He was striking, tall, lean, with jet black hair slicked back from a face that could have been carved from stone. His eyes, a strange shade of dark silver gray, revealed nothing. In every photo he wore immaculately tailored black suits that probably cost more than her rent in Lagos for an entire year. But it was the tattoos that caught her attention. Visible just above his collar in some photos. The edge of something dark and intricate. A dragon perhaps. Traditional Korean style. The kind of art that told a story she couldn't read. Stay away from him, Amarachi had warned when she caught Zamora looking at an article about him. He's not someone you need to know. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The gala was supposed to be simple. Amarachi had been assigned to help coordinate an annual charity event hosted by Kwon Holdings. A lavish affair at the Shilla Hotel, where Seoul's elite would gather to donate money and be seen donating money. She needed an extra set of hands, and Zamora, despite her protests, was recruited. "You don't have to talk to anyone," Amarachi had assured her. "Just help me keep track of the guest list. Make sure the flowers are arranged correctly. Stay in the background." Zamora had agreed reluctantly. She didn't belong in this world of crystal chandeliers and designer gowns. Her amber-brown eyes took in the scene with an artist's appreciation for the visual spectacle, but her heart felt out of place among these people who moved through wealth like fish through water. She was checking the seating arrangements in a back corridor when she heard the footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. She looked up. And there he was. Kwon Tae-gun in person was nothing like his photographs. The images had captured his features but not his presence. He filled the corridor simply by standing in it, 6 feet 3 inches of controlled power wrapped in a black three-piece suit that fit him like a second skin. His dark silver-gray eyes found her immediately, and Zamora felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. Up close she could see the tattoo clearly now, a traditional black and gray Korean dragon that began behind his right ear and extended downward toward his collarbone, partially visible above his crisp white shirt. Smoke detailing surrounded the intricate scales, creating an illusion of movement. On his hands she noticed letters inked across his knuckles. Loyalty on the right, honor on the left. His presence was overwhelming. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just absolute. Like standing before a force of nature and realizing how small you truly were. "You're in my way." His voice was deep. Calm. The kind of calm that made people nervous because it suggested he never needed to raise it. Zamora realized she was blocking the corridor. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping aside quickly. He didn't move past her. Instead he studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're new." "I'm helping my sister." "With the event." "Your sister?" "Amarachi Obi. She works in your corporate office." Something flickered in those silver-gray eyes. Something that came and went so quickly Zamora almost missed it. "I know who Amarachi is." The way he said her sister's name, Zamora couldn't place it. "Familiar." "Too familiar." "You're Nigerian," he said. "Yes." "You have her face." The observation startled her. She and Amarachi shared their mother's features. The defined cheekbones, the warm undertone of their dark brown skin. But few people noticed the resemblance at first glance. "We're sisters," Zamora said carefully. "It happens." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "What's your name?" "Zamora." He repeated it silently, his lips forming the syllables without sound. Then he nodded once and walked past her, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until he disappeared around a corner. Zamora leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She didn't know what had just happened. But she knew with a certainty she couldn't explain that something had shifted. After that night Tae-gun seemed to appear everywhere. Not aggressively. Not pursuing her. Just present. At the office when she came to bring Amarachi lunch. In the lobby of a gallery she visited alone. At a cafe in Itaewon where she'd stopped to sketch the street outside. Each time he acknowledged her with nothing more than a nod. A brief meeting of eyes. A moment of recognition that felt strangely intimate despite the distance between them. Her sister noticed. He asked about you, Amarachi said one evening, her voice tight. Zamora looked up from her sketchbook. Who? Don't play games, Z. You know who. What did he ask? Amarachi's jaw clenched. How long you're staying. What you do. Whether you're seeing anyone. The last question hung in the air between them. What did you tell him? The truth. That you're only here temporarily. That you're an artist. That your personal life is none of his business. Amarachi crossed her arms. I told you to stay away from him. I haven't done anything. It doesn't matter what you've done. It matters what he's decided. Her sister's dark eyes were hard. Men like Kwon Tae-gun don't ask questions casually. When he wants information, it's because he's planning something. Maybe he's just curious. He doesn't get curious. He gets interested. And you don't want to be interesting to someone like him. But it was too late for warnings. Zamora was already interesting to Kwon Tae-gun. And he was becoming dangerously interesting to her. The invitation came 2 days later. A private dinner at his estate. Business, the message said. But Amarachi was already committed to a meeting in Busan, and someone needed to represent her absence. You can't go, Amarachi said immediately. You said it was business. It's never just business with him. Then send someone else. Amarachi hesitated. Her phone buzzed, the third time in the past minute. Whatever was happening in Busan was urgent, pulling her attention in 2 directions. There is no one else, she finally admitted. The dinner involves discussing a charitable project I've been coordinating. If no one from my team shows up, it reflects badly on me. On my position. Zamora watched her sister's face, reading the tension there, the exhaustion, the desperation she was trying to hide. I'll go, she said quietly. I'll be professional. I'll talk about your project. And then I'll leave. Amarachi wanted to argue. Zamora could see it in the set of her shoulders, the press of her lips. But the phone buzzed again and time was running out. Don't let him get inside your head, she finally said. That's how he works. He makes you feel seen. Understood. Like you're the only person in the room. But it's a strategy, Z. Everything with him is a strategy. I'll be careful. Promise me. I promise. But promises, Zamora would learn, were fragile things in the world of Kwon Tae-gun. The estate in Hanamdong was hidden behind walls and guards and surveillance cameras that blinked red in the evening darkness. A driver had picked her up, a silent man in a black suit who spoke only to confirm her name before ushering her into a town car with tinted windows. The house itself was traditional Korean architecture reimagined through modern luxury. Clean lines. Natural materials. Gardens that suggested peace while the guards stationed throughout suggested war. Zamora was led to a private dining room where a table had been set for 2. Not a business dinner. Something else entirely. Tae-gun stood by the window looking out at the city lights. He'd removed his jacket, and Zamora could see the full sleeves of his arm tattoos extending below the rolled cuffs of his white shirt. Intricate black and gray work featuring a Korean tiger, mountain landscapes, ancient calligraphy, and prayer beads wrapped around his forearm. He turned when she entered. You came. You invited me. I invited your sister. She sent you instead. She had a conflict. She was afraid. The words landed between them, too honest for comfort. She's protective, Zamora said carefully. Of you. From me. He moved toward the table, pulling out a chair. She thinks I'm dangerous. Are you? He met her eyes. Those silver-gray depths revealed nothing and everything at once. To most people, yes. But not to me. I haven't decided yet. It should have frightened her. Maybe it did in some distant part of her mind. But fear wasn't the dominant emotion as she took the seat he offered. Curiosity was. And something else. Something that felt like recognition, though she couldn't explain why. Dinner was quiet. He asked about her work. Her illustrations. What she saw when she looked at the world. His questions were precise, probing without being intrusive, revealing a mind that processed information strategically. She asked about his art collection. His taste in literature. What Seoul looked like from his perspective at the top. He answered carefully. Measured responses that gave just enough to seem open without revealing anything vulnerable. But as the evening progressed, something shifted. A pause in conversation. A moment where his eyes lingered on her face too long. A softening around his mouth that might have been real or might have been strategy. "Why did you really invite my sister tonight?" Zamora asked finally. Taegun set down his glass. "I wanted to discuss the charitable project. We haven't discussed it once." "No. We haven't. So why am I here?" The question hung in the air. He looked at her, really looked, and for a moment his carefully constructed mask seemed to slip. "Because I wanted to see you again." The admission was raw. Unexpected from a man who dealt in calculation and control. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead he studied her face as though searching for something he'd lost. "You remind me of someone," he finally said. "Who?" "Someone I couldn't save." The words were so quiet she almost missed them. And before she could ask more, his mask was back in place, his expression neutral, the moment of vulnerability sealed away behind years of training. "It's late," he said. "My driver will take you home." He stood. Conversation over. But as she left his dining room that night, Zamora couldn't shake the feeling that she'd glimpsed something hidden. A wound beneath the armor. A ghost he was still trying to outrun. After that dinner the invitations stopped. Taegun didn't appear at the cafe or the gallery or the office. He seemed to have withdrawn completely, and Amarachi, who returned from Busan looking even more exhausted than before, didn't mention his name. But others did. Zamora began to notice whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. Glances exchanged between Amarachi's colleagues that suggested secrets she wasn't supposed to know. And then there was the phone call. It came at 3 a.m, pulling Zamora from an uneasy sleep. Amarachi's voice on the other end was strained, urgent. "Something's happened. I need you to come to the office. Now." "Amma, what's going on?" "Just come. Please." The corporate building was empty at this hour except for security guards who nodded Zamora through without question. She found her sister in a conference room on the executive floor, pacing before a wall of windows that overlooked the glittering city. "He's in danger," Amarachi said without preamble. "Who?" "Taegun." Her sister's voice cracked on his name. "There's been a threat. A serious one. His rivals are moving against him and they're using information they shouldn't have." Zamora processed this slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to do something for me. Something I can't ask anyone else." "Alma." "He needs someone with him tonight. Someone to monitor his condition. He hasn't slept in 3 days and his body is beginning to shut down, but he won't let his guards that close. Won't let anyone that close." "Why would he let me?" Amarachi stopped pacing. She turned to face her sister and in her eyes, Zamora saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. "Because he asked for you." The words didn't make sense. They didn't fit with anything Zamora understood about the careful distance Taegun had maintained since their dinner. "He asked for me?" "He's been medicated. His doctor insisted, but he's fighting it. Fighting sleep. Fighting everything." Amarachi's hands were trembling. "He kept saying your name. Over and over. Said he needed you there." "Why?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to cost her sister something. "I don't know why he trusts you. I don't know what he sees when he looks at you. But I know that right now, you're the only person he's willing to have near him." Zamora wanted to ask more questions. About her sister's relationship with this man. About the fear in her eyes. About the secrets she was still keeping. But there wasn't time. An hour later she was in his bedroom, watching him finally succumb to exhaustion. His face was different in sleep. Younger. More vulnerable. The hard lines softened and for the first time she could imagine who he might have been before the empire and the enemies and the weight of his name. The storm raged outside. Inside she kept vigil. And then she heard it. His voice, soft and broken and raw. "Amarachi." Her world shifted. Every confused feeling she'd been harboring, every strange pull toward this dangerous man, suddenly made terrible sense. It wasn't her he wanted. It had never been her. He was dreaming of her sister. Calling her name like a prayer. Like a confession. Like love. Zamora sat frozen, watching him murmur Amarachi's name again, his brow furrowed with pain even in sleep. The tattoos on his hands caught the dim light. Loyalty, honor. mocking her with their promises. She didn't know how long she sat there. Minutes. Hours. Time lost meaning as the truth crystallized inside her. He had invited her to dinner because she reminded him of her sister. He had asked questions about her life because he was really asking about Amarachi. He had let her close tonight because in his medicated, exhausted state, her face was close enough to the one he actually wanted. He was a substitute. A shadow. A stand-in for the woman he loved. By the time dawn began to lighten the sky, Zamora had made her decision. She moved silently through the estate, past sleeping guards who would never know she'd gone. She didn't pack everything, just a small bag with essentials. The rest could be sent later or abandoned entirely. Amarachi was still at the office. Zamora left her a note, 3 words that said everything and nothing. I'm going home. Then she booked the first flight to Lagos. 12 hours later she was gone. Anquan Taegun woke to find the chair beside his bed empty. He knew immediately that something was wrong. The air felt different. The silence had a texture to it, heavy, charged like the moment before an explosion. Min-kyu. His right-hand man appeared instantly as though he'd been waiting just outside the door. Seo Min-kyu was tall for a Korean man, athletically built, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd served Taegun for 15 years, through blood and business and everything in between. Sir. Where is she? Min-kyu hesitated. That hesitation told Taegun everything he needed to know. Miss Zamora left the estate approximately 6 hours ago. Our surveillance shows her departing through the East Garden entrance at 5:47 a.m. Left. Yes, sir. And went where? Another hesitation. We're still confirming. Find her. The words were quiet, controlled. But Min-kyu had known Taegun long enough to recognize the danger beneath the calm. Yes, sir. Taegun sat up slowly. His body felt heavy, drugged. The lingering effects of the medication his doctor had forced on him. 3 days without sleep had pushed him to the edge, and his people had intervened before he could push further. But she had been here. He remembered that much. Zamora, with her warm amber-brown eyes and her questions that cut deeper than she realized. Zamora, who looked at him like he was a puzzle she wanted to solve instead of a monster she should run from. Zamora, who had vanished without a word. Sir. Min-kyu was still standing in the doorway. There's something else. What? Her sister. Amarachi Obi. She's requested an emergency meeting. Taegun's jaw tightened. Send her in. Amarachi entered his study 20 minutes later, her composure cracked but still holding. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on the night before, corporate attire now wrinkled, her long braids escaping their careful arrangement. She's gone, Amarachi said without preamble. Zamora. She took a flight to Lagos this morning. Taegun stood by the window, his back to her. He'd showered, dressed, restored the armor that the world expected to see. His black suit was immaculate. His expression was stone. I know. I came to tell you. She stopped, hearing the flatness in his voice. You already knew. My people tracked her to Incheon. She boarded Korean Air Flight 085 at 10:15 a.m. He turned to face her. What I don't know is why. Amarachi's composure slipped further. I was hoping you could tell me. She left no note? Just 3 words. I'm going home. No explanation. Nothing. Taegun's silver-gray eyes studied her face, searching for deception. He found only confusion, which made the situation even less comprehensible. What happened last night? Amarachi asked carefully. After I sent her to you? She sat with me. As you asked. And nothing. I slept. When I woke she was gone. But even as he said the words, something nagged at the edge of his memory. A dream. Fragmented images. A voice calling a name. I was medicated, he said slowly. My doctor said I might experience disorientation. Vivid dreams. Did you dream? He didn't answer. The fragments were reassembling themselves, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. A storm. A woman's face. A name on his lips. Amarachi. The realization hit him like ice water. I spoke in my sleep. Amarachi's brow furrowed. What? I was dreaming. And I spoke. His hands clenched at his sides. What name would I say? In a dream? If I were fighting sleep for 3 days and finally succumbed, what name would come out of my mouth? He watched understanding dawn on Amarachi's face. Watched it transform into horror. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh Taegun, no. She heard me say your name. And she thought," Amarachi pressed a hand to her mouth. "She thought you were dreaming about me." "Yes. That you wanted me." "Yes." The silence that followed was devastating. Because they both knew the truth. The real reason he would have called Amarachi's name in his sleep. The connection they shared that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with grief. "You have to tell her," Amarachi said. "You have to explain." "How?" His voice was raw. "How do I explain something I've spent 8 years burying? How do I tell her the truth without destroying everything I've built to protect it? The same way you just told me. With honesty. With pain. With whatever pieces of your heart you have left." Taegun turned back to the window. Souls spread out below him, millions of lives carrying on without any knowledge of the empire in their midst. For 8 years he had been in control. Of his business. His emotions. His past. But Zamora Obi had walked into his life 3 weeks ago, and suddenly nothing made sense anymore. "Find her address in Lagos," he said quietly. "Her phone number. Her email. Every way she can be contacted. And then I decide what I'm willing to risk." He didn't contact her immediately. For 3 days, Taegun pored over intelligence reports about threats he barely processed, attended meetings where his mind was elsewhere, moved through his empire like a ghost haunting his own kingdom. Min-kyu watched him with growing concern. "Sir, the situation with Jang Hyun-soo is escalating. Our contacts in Busan have confirmed he's making moves against our shipping routes." Jang Hyun-soo. His oldest rival. A man who had climbed to power through brutality where Taegun had used strategy. They had coexisted uneasily for years, each controlling their own territories, each watching for weakness in the other. "What moves?" 3 of our transport captains have been approached. Offered double their current pay to switch allegiances. And they refused. But Hyun-soo isn't stopping there. Min-kyu slid a folder across the desk. "He's been gathering intelligence. Personal intelligence. On you." Taegun opened the folder. Inside were photographs. Surveillance shots taken over the past month. Him at the gala. At the cafe in Itaewon. At his estate. In several of the photographs, Zamora was visible. "He knows about her," Taegun said flatly. "It appears so. How much does he know?" "Uncertain. But if he's connecting her to you, if he's trying to find leverage, then she's not safe." The words hung in the air. Taegun had spent years ensuring that his enemies had no weakness to exploit. No family. No lovers. No one whose safety could be used against him. But Zamora had slipped through his defenses without trying. And now she was 12,000 kilometers away, believing he loved her sister, believing she meant nothing to him, with no idea that a dangerous man might be watching her movements. He made his decision. "Prepare the jet." "Sir. I'm going to Lagos." Zamora was attempting to rebuild her life. The apartment in Lagos felt smaller than she remembered. The familiar streets seemed duller. Even her work had lost its spark. Every illustration she started seemed to wither before completion. Mrs. Ngozi Ease, the elderly woman who lived next door, had been watching her with worried eyes since she returned. "You look like someone who's lost something precious," Mrs. Ease said one evening, stopping Zamora in the hallway. "I'm fine, Mama Ngozi." "You are many things, child, but fine is not one of them." The older woman pressed a warm hand to Zamora's cheek. "Whatever happened in Korea, it's still eating at you." Zamora wanted to deny it. But Mrs. Ease had known her since childhood, had held her through the grief of losing her parents, had celebrated every small victory of her adult life. "I made a mistake," she admitted quietly. "I let myself feel something for someone who wanted someone else." "Ah." Mrs. Ease nodded sagely. "The heart is not always wise in its choices." He whispered her name in his sleep. "My sister's name. And you decided this meant he loved her. What else could it mean?" Mrs. Ease was quiet for a moment. Her dark eyes, clouded slightly with age but still sharp, studied Zamora's face. "When I lost my husband," she said finally, "I used to dream of him every night. I would wake calling his name. But it wasn't love that made me say it. It was grief. Guilt. All the words I never got to speak when he was alive. That's different. Is it? Mrs. Ease smiled gently. Names carry many meanings, child. Love is only one of them. But Zamora couldn't bring herself to consider the alternatives. The pain was too fresh and hope felt too dangerous. She thanked Mrs. Ease and retreated to her apartment, where she spent another sleepless night staring at the ceiling. The knock on her door came 5 days after her return. She assumed it was a delivery, the art supplies she'd ordered online perhaps, or one of the neighbor children selling biscuits. She opened the door without checking the peephole. And there he was. Kwon Tae-gun standing in the hallway of her modest Lagos apartment building, looking impossibly out of place in his tailored black suit and $1,000 shoes. His silver-gray eyes found hers immediately, and she saw something in them she hadn't expected. Fear. Not of her. Not of this unfamiliar city. Fear of what she might say. What she might do. How she might send him away. How did you find me? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I own companies that specialize in finding people. That should probably frighten me. It doesn't. She searched her own emotions and found only exhaustion. I think I've used up all my fear. He stood there waiting, respecting the boundary of her doorway, not pushing past it even though she knew he could. Even though his presence alone was push enough. What do you want? She asked. To explain. There's nothing to explain. You love my sister. I overheard you dreaming about her. End of story. No. The word was sharp. Certain. Not end of story. Not even close. Then what? Let me in. It wasn't a command. Coming from a man who commanded everything, it was almost a plea. Give me 10 minutes. If you still want me gone after that, I'll leave. I'll never contact you again. But please, let me explain what you heard. Zamora knew she should refuse. She should slam the door, block his number, pretend this conversation never happened. But she couldn't. Because despite everything, despite the pain of that stormy night, despite the weeks of trying to erase him from her thoughts, she still wanted to understand. She stepped aside. He entered. And everything changed. Her apartment was small. Colorful. Filled with sketches and paintings and the beautiful chaos of a creative mind. Tae-gun surveyed it all quickly, cataloging details the way he always did, but his attention kept returning to her. She looked tired. The warm undertone of her dark brown skin seemed duller than he remembered. Her natural black curls were pulled back carelessly, but she was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, and he had spent 8 years believing he would never think that about anyone again. 10 minutes, she said, crossing her arms. The name you heard me say. Amarachi. Your dream about my sister. It wasn't about your sister. He held up a hand when she started to protest. Please. Let me finish. She fell silent, waiting. Tae-gun drew a breath. What he was about to say he had never spoken aloud to anyone outside his closest circle. It was the secret at the heart of his existence, the wound that had shaped everything he'd become. 8 years ago I had a daughter. The words hung in the air between them. Zamora's expression shifted. Confusion, shock, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Her name was Sumin, he continued. She was 5 years old. Her mother and I were never married, but I loved that child more than I thought I could love anything. His voice remained steady, controlled. But each word cost him something. She was taken from me. Kidnapped by a rival organization trying to force my cooperation in a deal I refused to make. They held her for 6 days. Oh God, Zamora whispered. I did everything. Paid every ransom. Made every concession. Violated every principle I had. His silver-gray eyes had gone distant, seeing a past she couldn't reach. But they killed her anyway. They killed her and they made sure I knew, and then they disappeared before I could find them. Zamora's hands had dropped to her sides. She was staring at him like she'd never seen him before. Your sister, Tae-gun said quietly, was the nurse who cared for Sumin in her final hours. My enemies dumped her body at a hospital in Busan and Amarachi was there. She held my daughter's hand while she died. She was kind to her when no one else could be. Amarachi never told me. She wouldn't. She signed confidentiality agreements to protect both of us. But I've kept track of her all these years. Made sure her career advanced. Ensured she was protected without knowing it. The pieces were falling into place in Zamora's mind. The prestigious job at Quan Holdings. The mysterious favors. The weight her sister always seemed to carry. When I say her name in my sleep, Taegun continued, it's because she's connected to the worst moment of my life. The name triggers the memory. Brings me back to those 6 days when I would have given anything to save my daughter. And Zamora's voice broke. You thought I was in love with her. His expression softened with something like pain. You thought you were a substitute for the woman I really wanted. Yes. You weren't. He took a step closer. You were never a substitute. From the moment I saw you in that corridor at the gala, I knew you were different. I kept my distance because I didn't trust what I was feeling. Because I had convinced myself that I would never feel anything again. Zamora shook her head. You barely know me. I know enough. I know that you look at the world like you're trying to capture it. I know that you love your sister enough to fly across the world when she needs you. I know that you sat beside my bed during a storm and didn't run, even though everyone else runs from me eventually. I did run. That morning. You ran because you thought I wanted someone else. That's not running from me. That's protecting yourself. She couldn't argue with that. Couldn't find words for anything she was feeling. I'm not asking you to trust me, Taegun said. I know what I am. I know the blood on my hands. But I needed you to know the truth. You deserved that much. He turned toward the door and Zamora realized with a jolt that he was actually leaving. He had come 12,000 kilometers to explain himself, and now he was walking away. Wait. He stopped. She moved around him, blocking his path to the door. Her heart was pounding but her voice was steady. You came all this way. Yes. You told me a secret you've kept for 8 years. Yes. And now you're just going to leave? Something flickered in his silver-gray eyes. You asked me to explain. I explained. I also said I'd used up all my fear. What does that mean? Zamora looked up at him. This man who controlled an empire, who had enemies throughout Asia, who had lost a child and rebuilt himself from the ashes of that grief. It means I don't know how to feel about you, she admitted. It means you terrify me in ways I can't explain. But it also means I'm not ready to say goodbye. He was so still she could barely see him breathing. What are you suggesting? I don't know. She laughed slightly, surprising herself. I have no idea what I'm doing. But you're here. And I'm here. And maybe that means something. It means everything. The words were so quiet she almost missed them. But she saw them in his eyes. Vulnerability from a man who showed none. Want from a man who denied himself everything. Stay, she said. Not forever. For a while. Let me get to know who you really are. Taegun reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her jaw. A touch so gentle it seemed impossible from hands that had done such violence. I'll stay as long as you'll have me. The days that followed were strange and tentative and nothing like Zamora had expected. Kwon Taegun did not belong in Lagos. He drew stares everywhere they went. A towering Korean man in expensive suits, moving through crowded markets and local restaurants with a quiet intensity that attracted attention whether he wanted it or not. But he adapted. He loosened his collar in the heat. He learned to navigate street food vendors and Lagos traffic and the particular chaos that defined the city's rhythm. He listened more than he spoke, watching Zamora interact with her world, cataloging details like he was memorizing her for a test he couldn't afford to fail. And slowly, carefully, he let her see behind the armor. Tell me about Sumin, she asked one evening as they sat on her small balcony watching the sun set. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, she was fearless. Even at 5. She would climb anything, touch anything, ask questions that most adults couldn't answer. What kind of questions? Why is the sky blue? What happens when we die? If you love someone, do they always know? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She was convinced that love was a tangible thing. Something you could hold in your hands and give away. Children often are. She would have liked you. He said it simply without sentiment. She was drawn to people who saw the world differently. Zamora felt the weight of the compliment settle into her bones. I'm sorry, she said, that you lost her. I spent years trying to pretend I hadn't. Throwing myself into work. Building an empire that no one could touch. But you can't armor yourself against grief. It finds a way in eventually. Is that what's happening now? Grief finding its way in. He turned to look at her, his silver-gray eyes warm in the fading light. Something is finding its way in. I'm not sure grief is the right word for it. She didn't ask him to elaborate. Didn't push for definitions or declarations. They sat together as darkness fell, and for the first time since Seoul, Zamora felt something like peace. But peace in the world of Kwon Taegun was always temporary. The message from Min-kyu arrived on the 6th day, encrypted through channels that even Zamora didn't understand. She watched Taegun's face change as he read it, watched the softness of the past days harden into something cold and dangerous. What is it? He didn't answer immediately. His jaw was tight, his hands clenching around the phone. Jang Hyun-soo, he finally said. The name meant nothing to Zamora, but she could read its weight in Taegun's expression. He's my oldest rival. We've maintained an uneasy truce for years, but he's been testing boundaries lately. Looking for weakness. And he's found one? Taegun met her eyes. He's found you. The words hung in the air like a threat made manifest. He has surveillance photographs. Us together in Seoul and here in Lagos. He's been tracking my movements, trying to understand why I would leave my territory for a woman. What does he want? Control. Power. Everything I've built. Taegun moved toward the window, looking out at the city with new eyes, assessing sightlines, calculating risks. In his world, personal attachments are weakness. He'll try to use you against me. Fear stirred in Zamora's chest, but she pushed it down. What does that mean for me? It means you're not safe here anymore. This is my home. A home that Hyun-soo now has photographs of, with an address that wasn't hard to find. In a city where I have no infrastructure, no protection networks, no way to guarantee your security. So what do you propose? I run again. No. He turned to face her. You come with me. Back to Seoul. Where I can protect you. Protect me by putting me at the center of your world? A world that sounds incredibly dangerous. Protect you by keeping you close. Where I can control the variables. Zamora shook her head. I'm not a variable to be controlled. I know that. His voice softened. I know you're not. But if something happened to you because of me, because someone I've spent my life fighting decided to use you as a weapon, I wouldn't survive it. Not after Sumin. It was the rawest thing he'd ever said to her. Zamora crossed the room, closing the distance between them. He watched her approach with an expression caught between hope and fear. I'm not going to run, she said quietly. Not from you. Not from this. Then come with me. Not as a prisoner. Not as someone I'm controlling. As a partner. Someone who knows the risks and chooses to face them anyway. He should have said no. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was insanity. Falling into the orbit of a man who lived in constant danger, whose enemies were now her enemies, whose world was built on foundations she couldn't fully understand. But logic had never governed the heart. Okay, she said. I'll come. Something released in his expression. Tension she hadn't realized he was carrying. We leave tomorrow. Pack what you need. Everything else can be sent later. What about my work? My life here. Your work can be done anywhere. Your life. He paused, searching for the right words. Your life is yours to build however you choose. I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm asking you to let me be part of it. Zamora looked around her small apartment. The paintings on the walls, the sketches scattered across her desk, the evidence of a life she had built through years of careful effort. She was about to trade all of it for uncertainty. For danger. For a man she barely knew but couldn't seem to walk away from. Tomorrow, she agreed. But Taegun. Yes. If this is going to work, you have to promise me something. Anything. No more secrets. Whatever you're protecting me from, whatever threats are out there, I need to know about them. I won't be kept in the dark like some fragile thing that might break. He considered this. She could see the conflict in his expression. Years of habit warring against the understanding of what she was asking. Some truths are dangerous, he said finally. Some things once known can't be unknown. I'll take that risk. And if the truth changes how you see me? She reached up, touching his face the way he had touched hers that first night in her apartment. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, the stubble rough against her palm. Then at least I'll be seeing the real you. He closed his eyes briefly, leaning into her touch like a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. No more secrets, he agreed. Starting now. And there, in her small Lagos apartment, as the city hummed outside and danger gathered in the distance, Kwon Tae-gun began to tell her everything. The flight to Seoul was 18 hours of tension masked by luxury. Tae-gun's private jet was equipped with everything money could buy: leather seats that reclined into beds, a full galley staffed by silent attendants, communication systems that kept him connected to his empire even at 40,000 feet. Zamora spent most of the flight sketching. It was how she processed things, putting pen to paper, letting her hands translate the chaos in her mind into something visible. She drew the view from her window, the curve of the clouds, and when she thought he wasn't watching, the sharp lines of Tae-gun's profile. He was on the phone for hours, speaking rapid Korean to people whose names she didn't recognize. His tone shifted depending on the conversation. Cold with subordinates, colder with rivals, occasionally warming into something that might have been affection when speaking with Min-kyu. She was beginning to understand the layers of him. The face he showed the world. The face he showed her. The face he might not show anyone at all. "We'll be landing in 2 hours," he said, ending his final call and turning to face her. "Min-kyu has arranged security. You'll be staying at my estate." "The same estate where I watched you sleep?" A slight tightening of his jaw. "Yes. I wasn't sure I'd ever go back there." "Neither was I." He sat down across from her, his silver-gray eyes searching her face. "You left that night without saying goodbye. I thought. I know what you thought. But I need you to understand what it felt like from my side. Waking up alone. Knowing you'd been there. Knowing you'd heard something that drove you away without any chance to explain." Zamora set down her sketchbook. "It wasn't easy for me either. No. I had started to feel something. For you. Despite all my warnings to myself, despite knowing how dangerous you were. And then I heard you say her name and I thought," she stopped, collecting herself. "I thought I was invisible. Just a stand-in for someone you actually wanted. You were never invisible." His voice was quiet but fierce. "From the moment I saw you, you were the only thing I could see." The words landed in her chest, warm and terrifying and undeniable. "I don't know what we're doing," she admitted. "Neither do I. But I know what I want." "What's that?" "Time." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Time to show you who I am. Time to learn who you are. Time that doesn't end with you disappearing before I can make things right. And if time runs out, if your rival, Hyun-soo, if he moves against us before we've had a chance, then I'll do what I've always done. I'll fight. I'll win. And I'll keep you safe while I do it." There was no arrogance in his voice. Just certainty. The certainty of a man who had faced impossible odds before and survived. "I don't want to be the reason you go to war," Zamora said. "You won't be the reason. You'll be the thing I'm fighting for." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. The tattoos on his knuckles, loyalty, honor, pressed against her skin. "I'm in this," she said. "Whatever this is. Even knowing what you're walking into? Especially knowing." Something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly, but the loosening of a tension so deep she hadn't realized he was carrying it. "Then we face it together." Seoul welcomed them with rain. Soft, steady rain that blurred the city lights and made the streets shimmer like something out of a dream. The drive from the airport to Hanamdong was silent, Tae-gun's hand resting on her knee while he watched the familiar landscape pass. The estate looked different in daylight, or what passed for daylight through the gray clouds. Less fortress-like. More like a home, if homes came with security checkpoints and guards stationed at every entrance. Min-kyu met them at the front door. "Sir. Miss Obi." He nodded to each of them, his expression professionally neutral. "The estate is secure. Dr. Kong would like to check on you when you're settled." "Later," Tae-gun said. "First my study. We need to discuss the current situation." "Of course." Min-kyu's eyes flicked to Zamora. "Should I arrange accommodations for?" "She stays with me." Something flickered across Min-kyu's face. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. But he said nothing, simply nodding and leading them inside. The study was exactly as Zamora had imagined it. Dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with books that looked actually read rather than decoratively placed. A massive desk dominated one end of the room, its surface covered with papers and folders. And photographs. She noticed them immediately, surveillance shots spread across the desk. Her face in several of them. Her apartment in Lagos. Her walking through markets she recognized. "He's been watching me," she said flatly. "For weeks." Taegun moved to the desk, gathering the photographs. Hyunsu's people are thorough. They've mapped your routine, identified your connections, catalogued your vulnerabilities. Why? What does he want from me? Nothing from you directly. He wants leverage against me. Leverage for what? Taegun exchanged a glance with Min-kyu. "There's a deal in progress," Min-kyu said carefully. "A major expansion into Southeast Asian markets. Both organizations have been positioning themselves for months. And Hyunsu thinks I can be used to influence the outcome? He thinks your safety could be used to influence my decisions. That I would compromise my position rather than risk harm to you." The weight of it settled over Zamora. Not just that she was in danger, but that her danger was a weapon someone planned to use. "Would you," she asked quietly, "compromise your position?" Taegun's jaw tightened. "Yes. Even if it cost you the deal? Cost you everything you've built? Everything I've built means nothing if I can't protect the people I—" He stopped himself. But Zamora heard what he didn't say. "This is bigger than business, isn't it?" she said. "This rivalry. This goes back further." Hyunsu's organization was connected to the group that took Sumin. The air in the room went cold. He didn't order it. He may not have even known about it at the time. But his people provided infrastructure. Safe houses. Transport routes. Taegun's voice was steady, but she could hear the steel beneath it. "He's denied involvement for years, claimed ignorance. But I know. And he knows I know. So this isn't just about business. No. It never has been." Zamora looked at the photographs spread across the desk, her own face staring back at her from a dozen different angles. She was caught in the middle of a war that had started 8 years ago with the death of a child. And she had no idea how it would end. The first week passed in a strange rhythm. Zamora explored the estate during the day, sketching gardens and architecture while guards trailed at a respectful distance. She ate meals with Taegun when he could spare time from his meetings. Quiet dinners where they talked about everything except the danger closing in around them. At night they slept in separate rooms. It was an unspoken agreement. Whatever was building between them needed space to develop without pressure, without expectations, without the weight of circumstances forcing intimacy they hadn't earned. But she felt him watching her. Every glance. Every almost touch. Every moment where the air between them crackled with something unspoken. Amarachi called on the third day. "You're in Seoul." Her sister's voice was tight with worry. "With him?" "Yes." "Zamora. I know what I'm doing, Alma. Do you have any idea what you've walked into?" "He told me. About Sumin. About how you were there at the end." Silence on the other end of the line. "He told you," Amarachi finally said. "Why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't my secret to share. And because I didn't want you getting involved with someone whose life is built on." She stopped herself. "On what?" "Pain. Loss. Violence. All the things that make someone like him possible." Her sister's voice softened. "I didn't want that for you. But you worked for him. All these years. Because I owed him something. Not romance. Gratitude. He took care of me when I needed help, and I've repaid that by doing my job well. But I never forgot what he was. What he's capable of." "And what is he capable of?" The pause before Amarachi answered was too long. "Anything," she said finally. "He's capable of absolutely anything." The answer to that question came 5 days later. Zamora woke to shouting, sharp Korean voices echoing through the halls. She threw on a robe and stepped into the corridor where Min-kyu nearly collided with her. "Miss Obi. You should stay in your room." "What's happening?" "A security breach. One of our perimeter guards was compromised." "Compromised how?" Min-kyu's expression was grim. "He was found dead 30 minutes ago. The surveillance footage shows nothing. The cameras were disabled before the attack." Zamora's heart hammered against her ribs. "Where's Taegun?" "Handling the situation." "What does that mean?" Before Min-kyu could answer, Taegun appeared at the end of the corridor. He was wearing the clothes he'd had on yesterday. He hadn't slept. His silver-gray eyes found Zamora immediately, scanning her for injury. "You're safe," he said. "I'm fine. What happened?" He crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her against his chest. She could feel the tension in his body, the coiled energy of a man preparing for war. Hyun-soo sent a message. "One of my guards murdered on my own property." "What kind of message?" "That he can reach anyone. Anywhere." Taegun's arms tightened around her. "Including you." She pulled back to look at his face. The softness she'd grown accustomed to was gone, replaced by something cold and dangerous. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done years ago. End this." "Taegun. I've been patient. Played the long game because that's what my position required. But this," his jaw clenched. "He came onto my property. Killed one of my people. Made it clear that nothing is sacred. And if ending it means whatever it takes." She saw it then, the glimpse of the man Amarachi had warned her about. The one capable of anything. But instead of fear she felt something else. Understanding. "What do you need from me?" she asked. He looked at her like she'd said something impossible. "Stay safe. Let me protect you." "Is that all?" "That's everything." She reached up, touching his face the way she had in Lagos. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, felt the stubble that told her he hadn't shaved in days. "Then protect me," she said. "But don't disappear into whatever darkness you're planning. Don't leave me standing outside waiting to find out if you're coming back." "Zamora. I mean it. Whatever you're about to do, I want to know about it. You promised no more secrets." The conflict in his expression was visible, years of solitary decision-making warring against the commitment he'd made to her. "Some of what I'm planning," he said slowly, "you won't want to know. Tell me anyway." And in the cold light of morning, with a dead man's blood still fresh on his property, Kwon Taegun told her exactly what he was going to do to Jang Hyun-soo. The plan was elegant in its brutality. Hyun-soo's organization ran on money. Specifically, money flowing through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts that even most of his own people didn't fully understand. But Taegun understood. He had spent years mapping the financial architecture, identifying vulnerabilities, waiting for the right moment to strike. "I'm going to destroy him economically first," Taegun explained. "Freeze his assets. Expose his money laundering. Turn his allies against him by making it too expensive to stay loyal. And then I'll give him a choice. Surrender everything and disappear, or face what comes next." "What comes next?" Taegun's eyes were cold. "What do you think?" Zamora absorbed this. She was sitting in his study, watching him outline the destruction of a man's life like it was a business proposal. "You'll kill him," she said flatly. "If I have to. And you don't see a problem with that?" "I see the problem. I also see the alternative." He leaned forward. "He won't stop, Zamora. Men like Hyun-soo don't negotiate. They don't compromise. They push until someone pushes back harder. There has to be another way." "There isn't. I've tried every other way. Years of careful boundaries. Years of managed coexistence. And where has it gotten me? A dead guard. Photographs of you being used as leverage. The constant threat of escalation." She wanted to argue. Wanted to find the moral high ground that would make this situation cleaner than it was. But she couldn't. Because she knew he was right. "How long will it take?" she asked quietly. "The financial dismantling?" "Weeks. Maybe a month. The end game, that depends on how long Hyun-soo resists." "And I'm supposed to just wait here while you wage war?" "You're supposed to stay safe while I remove the threat against you." "I'm not good at waiting." Something softened in his expression. "I know. So give me something to do. Something that helps. Something that makes me feel like I'm part of this instead of just a target needing protection." He considered this. She could see him calculating risks, weighing options. "There is one thing," he finally said. "Hyun-soo has connections I haven't fully mapped. People in the legitimate world who provide cover for his operations. Artists. Gallery owners. Cultural figures who launder his reputation along with his money. You want me to identify them? You have access I don't. You're an artist. You can move in those circles without raising suspicion. You want me to spy. I want you to observe. Notice connections that others might miss. Use the same eye for detail that makes your illustrations so precise. It was dangerous. She knew that. But it was also a chance to be active rather than passive. To fight back instead of just hiding. Okay, she said. Tell me where to start. The gallery was called Hanol and it was one of the most prestigious in Seoul. Zamora had done her research before arriving. 2 weeks of careful preparation, establishing her credentials as an illustrator interested in expanding into the Korean art market. She had legitimate connections now, thanks to Minkyu's subtle networking and legitimate reasons to be here. What she was looking for, however, was anything but legitimate. Miss Obi. The gallery owner approached her with practiced warmth. What a pleasure to meet you. Your work is extraordinary. Thank you. Zamora smiled, keeping her voice neutral despite the racing of her heart. I've heard wonderful things about Hanol. The owner, Park Ji-yeon, was elegant in that particular way that Zamora associated with old money. Tasteful jewelry. Designer clothing that whispered rather than shouted. Eyes that assessed everything without appearing to assess anything. Let me give you a tour, Ji-yeon offered. We're preparing for a major exhibition next month. Perhaps your work could be included. I would love that. They walked through galleries filled with stunning Korean contemporary art, and Zamora catalogued everything. The artists represented. The buyers who lingered over certain pieces. The conversations happening just out of earshot. And in the back office, glimpsed through a briefly opened door, the man she'd come to observe. Jang Hyun-soo. He was older than Taegun, perhaps 50, with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome before cruelty carved lines into it. He was talking to someone on the phone, his expression animated with a violence his tailored suit couldn't disguise. Their eyes met through the doorway. Just for a second. Then Ji-yeon smoothly redirected Zamora's attention to a painting on the opposite wall, and the door closed. An associate of mine, Ji-yeon said casually. Interested in acquiring some pieces for his private collection. He seems intense. Collectors often are. Ji-yeon smiled. Passion is expensive. Zamora smiled back, her mind racing. Hyun-soo knew she was here. He had seen her. And the look in his eyes, predatory, calculating, amused, told her that her presence wasn't coincidence to him. He knew exactly who she was. She told Taegun that night, standing in his study while rain streaked the windows. His expression went dangerously flat. He was there. I saw him through a doorway. He saw me too. Did he approach you? No. He seemed, she searched for the right word. Pleased. Like he had confirmed something he suspected. He knew you would be there. You think he orchestrated it? I think nothing happens in Hyun-soo's orbit by accident. Taegun moved to the window, his posture rigid. He's playing a game. Testing how far I'll let you go. What risks I'm willing to take with you. I can handle myself. Against someone like him? He turned to face her. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then explain it to me. The silence stretched. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. When they took Sumin, they didn't just hold her for ransom. They sent me photographs. Every day. Showing me she was alive but terrified. Showing me that they could reach her whenever they wanted. Zamora felt sick. The photographs stopped on the 5th day. I hoped, that meant they were ready to negotiate. His eyes were distant, seeing something she couldn't. Instead they sent me her ribbon. The one she wore in her hair every day. It was covered in blood. Taegun. That's who Hyun-soo protects. That's the organization he benefits from. So when I tell you he's dangerous, I'm not exaggerating. I'm trying to make you understand what we're dealing with. Zamora crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. The tattoos on his knuckles were warm under her fingers. I understand, she said quietly. But I'm not backing down. I'm not hiding while you fight this alone. Even knowing what they did? Especially knowing. Because someone needs to stand with you. Someone needs to remind you that you're not alone anymore. He looked at her like she was speaking a language he'd forgotten. Like kindness was a concept he'd lost somewhere along the way. Then he pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair, and held her like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath his feet. The escalation began the next day. Reports flooded in from Taegun's network, Hyun-soo's shell companies frozen by regulatory action, his accounts flagged by banking authorities, his business partners suddenly unavailable for meetings. The financial architecture was crumbling exactly as Taegun had planned. But Hyunsu didn't respond with negotiation. He responded with violence. 3 of Taegun's warehouses were firebombed in a single night. A shipping captain loyal to the Kwon organization disappeared and was found 2 days later, beaten beyond recognition. And then the photographs arrived. Zamora. At the gallery. Walking through the estate gardens. Sitting in a cafe in Gangnam. Each image was accompanied by a single word, written in Korean that Min-kyu translated with a voice gone cold. He's threatening her directly now, Min-kyu said. This isn't posturing anymore. No. Taegun's jaw was tight. It's a challenge. He's daring me to come for him. And will you? The question hung in the air. Zamora watched Taegun's face, watched the battle playing out behind his silver-gray eyes. He could end this, she knew that. The resources at his disposal, the connections he'd built, the violence he was capable of. But ending it would cost him something. I need to make arrangements, he finally said. Min-kyu, triple the security detail. No one goes in or out without clearance. Yes, sir. And bring me the file on the Park Ji-yeon gallery. Every transaction. Every connection. I want to know exactly how deep Hyunsu's involvement goes. Min-kyu nodded and withdrew. In the silence that followed, Zamora spoke. You're going to confront him. Yes. When? Soon. Before he has time to escalate further. What does confrontation mean in your world? He met her eyes. In them she saw the answer before he spoke it. Whatever it needs to mean. The meeting was arranged for 3 days later. Neutral Ground. A restaurant in the heart of Seoul that had hosted delicate negotiations between powerful men for generations. Privacy guaranteed. Security minimal by mutual agreement. Zamora wasn't supposed to be there. But she was anyway. Absolutely not, Taegun had said when she suggested it. He's already watching me. He already knows everything about my routine. What difference does it make if I'm there? The difference is putting you directly in front of him. Giving him the opportunity to. To what? Hurt me in a public place with witnesses? He's not that stupid. You don't know what he's capable of. Then let me find out. Let me look him in the eye and show him I'm not afraid. They had argued for an hour. She had won through sheer stubbornness, through the recognition that hiding hadn't protected her and wouldn't start now. So she was there when Jang Hyun-soo walked into the private room. He was smaller than she expected. The photographs had made him seem imposing, but in person he was just a man. Older, silver-haired, with cold eyes that slid over her like she was inventory to be assessed. Kwon Taegun. His voice was smooth, cultured. I see you've brought your new possession. She's not a possession. No. Hyun-soo's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then what is she? An advisor? A bodyguard? Or just entertainment for the man who has everything? She's the reason we're having this conversation instead of a war. Something flickered in Hyun-soo's expression. Interest perhaps. Or calculation. The girl matters to you. I suspected as much. She's not a girl. No, Hyun-soo agreed, his gaze returning to Zamora. She's not. He's quite remarkable actually. Your sister spoke highly of you when my people asked. Ice flooded Zamora's veins. Your people spoke to Amarachi? Just questions. Professional inquiries about her employer's interests. His smile widened. She was very loyal. Refused to say anything useful. But loyalty can be tested. If you touch her, Taegun's voice was quiet. Deadly. You'll what? You've already started dismantling my business. What more can you threaten? Everything you've ever built. Everyone you've ever cared about. Every inch of the empire you've spent your life creating. Taegun leaned forward. You made a mistake, Heinz. You made this personal. You made it personal first. 8 years ago. The air in the room seemed to contract. Sumin, Taegun said. I told you then I had nothing to do with what happened to your daughter. My organization. Your organization provided the safe houses. The transport routes. The infrastructure that made her kidnapping possible. Actions taken by subordinates without my knowledge. Actions you profited from. Actions you protected the perpetrators of afterward. Taegun's silver-gray eyes were chips of ice. You may not have ordered it. But you enabled it. And you've spent 8 years pretending otherwise. Hyun-soo's mask slipped. revealing something ugly beneath. You want someone to blame. I understand. Grief makes us irrational. But destroying me won't bring her back. No. It won't. Taegun's voice was terrifyingly calm. But it will ensure you never profit from another child's suffering. The silence that followed was absolute. Zamora watched both men, one radiating cold fury, the other calculating odds with the desperation of a man who saw his options narrowing. What do you want? Hyunsu finally asked. Everything. Your organization. Your assets. Your surrender. And in exchange? Your life. And the freedom to disappear somewhere I'll never have to see your face again. Hyunsu laughed. A harsh, humorless sound. You're asking me to give up everything I've built. I'm giving you a choice. More than your people gave my daughter. Another silence. Longer this time. When Hyunsu spoke again, his voice had changed. Harder. More dangerous. I don't negotiate with men who threaten me. And I don't give up what's mine. He stood. You want a war? You'll have one. But don't think your little Nigerian artist will protect you. She'll be the first thing I take. He walked out without looking back. And in the sudden stillness of the private room, Zamora felt the ground shift beneath her. The war had begun. The attack came 2 nights later. Zamora was asleep in her room at the estate when the explosion shattered the windows. Glass rained down around her and smoke filled the air, and for a terrifying moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but curl into a ball and pray. Then hands grabbed her. Strong hands, familiar hands, and she was being lifted, carried through chaos and fire and shouting voices. Taegun. His face was tight with fury and fear, and there was blood on his forehead. His or someone else's she couldn't tell, but his arms around her were solid and sure. I've got you, he said. I've got you. They made it to a reinforced room in the basement. A panic room, she realized, designed for exactly this kind of emergency. Min-kyu was already there, along with a handful of security personnel whose faces she didn't recognize. Report, Taegun barked. IED on the east perimeter. Another on the guest wing. 2 casualties confirmed, 3 more wounded. The primary target? Unclear. The devices were placed to cause confusion, not assassination. A distraction, Taegun said grimly. He's drawing our attention while he moves somewhere else. Should we? The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing the room in red, but the message was clear. Hyunsu's people had reached further than anyone expected. Get her out, Taegun said, turning to Min-kyu. The secondary extraction point. I'll draw their attention. Sir. That's an order. No. Zamora's voice cut through the tension. I'm not leaving you. Zamora. You said I was the reason we're having a war instead of a negotiation. That means I'm part of this. That means I stay. This isn't a debate. You're right. It's not. She met his eyes, unflinching. Where you go, I go. That's the deal now. She saw him struggle. The part of him that wanted to protect her at any cost warring with the part that recognized her right to choose. Finally, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood. Understood. They moved as a unit. Taegun, Zamora, Min-kyu and 4 guards, through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting. The estate that had seemed so grand was a maze of shadows now, every corner potentially hiding an enemy. They found the first of them near the study. 4 men, armed and professional, moving with the coordinated precision of military training. They didn't expect resistance, didn't expect Taegun to be armed and ready. The fight was brutal and brief. Zamora watched, pressed against the wall where Taegun had pushed her, as the man she was beginning to love moved with a violence she had only imagined. Efficient. Deadly. Without hesitation. When it was over, 4 men were on the ground, and Taegun was wiping blood from his hands with an expression of cold satisfaction. Clear, Min-kyu reported. But there will be more. Then we keep moving. The night became a blur of corridors and conflicts, of fear and adrenaline and the constant presence of Taegun's hand guiding her through darkness. By the time they reached the garage, by the time they were in an armored vehicle speeding away from the burning estate, Zamora felt like a different person than the woman who had woken to shattering glass. He almost had us, she said quietly. Taegun's jaw was tight. He won't again. How can you be sure? Because this ends tonight. She looked at him, at the blood on his shirt, the steel in his eyes, the barely contained violence radiating from every line of his body. What are you going to do? What I should have done years ago. And as the car raced through Seoul's dark streets, carrying them toward a confrontation she couldn't fully imagine, Zamora understood that the man beside her was about to become something she might not recognize. She only hoped she would still love him on the other side. The safe house was in Yongsan, tucked between a nondescript office building and a restaurant that had closed years ago. From the outside it looked abandoned, peeling paint, boarded windows, the kind of place people walked past without a second glance. Inside was a different story. Monitors lined one wall, displaying feeds from surveillance cameras positioned throughout the city. A communications hub occupied another corner, staffed by operatives whose faces Zamora didn't recognize. Weapons were being checked and distributed with the efficiency of a military operation. Because that's what this was now. Taegun moved through the space like he owned it, which Zamora realized he probably did. His presence commanded attention without demanding it. People stepped aside, awaited instructions, deferred to his quiet authority. She watched him transform before her eyes. The man who had held her during storms, who had told her about his daughter with pain in his voice, who had looked at her like she was something precious. That man receded. In his place was someone harder, colder. A version of Kwon Taegun that the world called the Ghost of Seoul. Status report. His voice cut through the ambient noise. Min-kyu appeared at his side with a tablet. Hyun-soo's position has been confirmed. He's at his secondary residence in Songbuk-dong. Security detail of approximately 20 men. Weaknesses. The northeast corner of the property shares a wall with a construction site. Our people can breach there without triggering the primary alarm systems. Civilian presence? Minimal. His household staff was dismissed yesterday. He's preparing for either victory or flight. Taegun absorbed this information, his silver-gray eyes calculating. He knows we're coming. Most likely. But he also believes his attack tonight weakened us significantly. His intelligence suggests our forces are in disarray. Let him believe that. A grim smile crossed Min-kyu's face. Sir. Zamora stood apart from the activity, trying to process everything she was witnessing. This was the world Taegun had spent years building, the infrastructure of violence that made his power possible. She had known about it intellectually, had accepted it as part of who he was. But seeing it in action was different. You're quiet. She turned to find him watching her, a rare moment of stillness in the chaos surrounding them. I'm processing. Second thoughts. No. She met his eyes. Just adjusting. He moved closer, blocking out the activity behind him. For a moment they existed in their own space. Just the two of them, separated from the war being planned around them. What you're about to see, he said quietly, may change how you look at me. I know. And you're still here. I'm still here. Something flickered in his expression. Gratitude perhaps, or wonder. He reached out, his fingers brushing her jaw in that gentle way that seemed impossible from hands capable of such violence. When this is over, he said, when Hyun-soo is no longer a threat, we need to talk. About what happens next. What happens next? Us. The word hung between them. I need to know if there's an us after tonight. Before she could respond, Min-kyu appeared again. Sir. Teams are in position. We're ready on your order. Taegun held her gaze for one more heartbeat. Then the softness disappeared, replaced by the cold focus of a commander going to war. Move out. Zamora wasn't supposed to be in the field. That was the plan. She would stay at the safe house, monitored by a security detail, while Taegun led the assault on Hyun-soo's compound. Safe. Protected. Away from the violence that was about to unfold. But plans, as she had learned, rarely survived contact with reality. The attack on the safe house came 30 minutes after Taegun's departure. She heard the shots first, sharp cracks that echoed through the building's concrete corridors. Then shouting in Korean she couldn't fully understand. Then the distinctive sound of bodies hitting the floor. The security detail assigned to protect her reacted instantly, forming a protective perimeter around her position. But there were too many attackers, too well coordinated, and one by one her protectors fell. Until she was alone. Almost. Miss Obi. The voice came from the doorway. A man stepped through, Korean, middle-aged, with the weathered face of someone who had spent his life in violence. He was flanked by two others, all of them armed, all of them focused on her. Mr. Jang sends his regards, the man continued. He thought you might be useful as a negotiating tool. Zamora's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her voice steady. Taegun won't negotiate. Then you'll die. Either way, Mr. Jang wins. The man gestured with his weapon. Move. We don't have much time. They took her through back corridors, past the bodies of fallen guards, to a vehicle waiting in the alley behind the building. She was pushed into the back seat, a hood thrown over her head, and the car began moving through streets she couldn't see. Time became elastic, stretching and contracting in the darkness of the hood. She tried to track turns to note sounds that might indicate their destination, but the fear made it difficult to focus. When the hood was finally removed, she was in a room she didn't recognize. Large, richly furnished. The kind of space that spoke of wealth accumulated over decades. Through floor-to-ceiling windows she could see Seoul's skyline glittering in the distance. And across the room, seated in a leather chair like a king on a throne, was Jang Hyun-soo. Miss Obi. His voice was almost pleasant. Welcome to my home. I apologize for the dramatic introduction, but circumstances required urgency. Zamora stood where his men had left her, hands bound in front of her, refusing to show the terror coursing through her veins. What do you want? What I've always wanted. For Kwon Taegun to understand that he cannot win. That some enemies are too powerful to defeat. Hyun-soo rose from his chair, approaching her with measured steps. You are the lesson I'm going to teach him. He'll kill you for this. Perhaps. Or perhaps, when he realizes what I'm prepared to do to you, he'll finally recognize that negotiation is his only option. Hyun-soo stopped inches from her, his cold eyes studying her face. You're beautiful. I can see why he's captivated. The great ghost of Seoul, brought low by a Nigerian artist. I haven't brought him low. No. He left his empire vulnerable to chase you across the world. He compromised his strategic position because he couldn't bear to see you threatened. He started a war that he might lose, all because you heard him say a name in his sleep and ran away. The words landed like blows, each one exposing the choices that had led to this moment. None of that is weakness, Zamora said quietly. That's love. Hyun-soo's expression flickered, something between amusement and contempt. Love is the greatest weakness of all. It makes us vulnerable, controllable, destroyable. He turned away, moving back toward his chair. Kwon Taegun will learn that lesson tonight. And you will be his teacher. The assault on Hyun-soo's compound went exactly as planned. Taegun's teams breached the northeast perimeter with surgical precision, neutralizing guards before they could raise an alarm. They moved through the property in coordinated waves, securing each area before advancing to the next. By the time Taegun reached the main house, his people controlled the grounds. But the house was empty. Sir. Min-kyu's voice crackled through his earpiece. We have a problem. Report. The safe house was hit. Same time we launched our assault. Ice flooded Taegun's veins. Zamora. Picken. Surveillance shows a vehicle heading northeast approximately 40 minutes ago. For a moment, just a moment, Taegun felt the world tilt beneath him. The careful control he had cultivated over decades threatened to shatter, replaced by the same blind panic he had felt 8 years ago when Sumin was taken. But he couldn't afford to panic now. Track the vehicle, he ordered, his voice dangerously calm. Every traffic camera, every satellite feed, every resource we have. I want her location within 15 minutes. Sir. Now Min-kyu. He moved through the empty house, searching for any intelligence his people might have missed. Files. Communications. Anything that could tell him where Hyun-soo had gone. In the study he found it. A photograph placed deliberately on the desk where he would see it. Zamora. Bound. Alive, thank God alive, but clearly a prisoner. On the back of the photograph, written in Hyun-soo's elegant hand. You took something from me. Now I've taken something from you. Come alone to the address below. Or watch her die the way your daughter did. Taegun stared at the words until they burned into his memory. Then he moved. The address led to an industrial complex on the outskirts of Seoul. A collection of abandoned factories that had been waiting for demolition for years. The kind of place where violence could happen without witnesses. Taegun arrived alone as instructed. He knew it was a trap. Knew that Hyun-soo had positioned snipers, planted explosives, prepared for every contingency. Walking into that complex was walking into a death sentence. But Zamora was inside. And he was done losing the people he loved. "I know you're watching," he said to the darkness, his voice carrying through the empty space. "Show yourself." Silence. Then lights flickered on, illuminating a central area where Zamora was bound to a chair. She looked up when she saw him, relief and terror warring in her amber-brown eyes. "Taegun," she breathed. "Don't." "Quiet." Hyun-soo emerged from the shadows, flanked by 6 armed men. Let him have his moment. The hero arriving to save his beloved. It's very romantic. Taegun's silver-gray eyes never left Hyun-soo's face. "Let her go. This is between us. It is between us. And she is the battlefield." Hyun-soo moved closer to Zamora, one hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of casual ownership. "You took my business, my money, my future. So I'm going to take the one thing that matters to you. If you hurt her..." "What? You'll kill me? You were always going to kill me. This way at least I get to watch you suffer first." Taegun's hands clenched at his sides. The rage building inside him was almost overwhelming. A tsunami of fury that wanted to sweep away everything in its path. But rage was a weakness. He had learned that the hard way 8 years ago. "You want me to suffer," he said quietly. "Fine. I'll suffer. But do it to me. Not to her." Hyun-soo's eyebrows rose slightly. "An exchange." "Yes. Your life for hers? Whatever you want. Just let her go." Zamora's voice cut through the tension. "No. Taegun, don't. Stay out of this." His voice was harder than he intended, sharper with the fear he was trying to hide. "This is my fault. My war. Let me end it." Hyun-soo seemed to consider this. His cold eyes moved between Taegun and Zamora, calculating options with the detachment of a chess player. "An interesting offer," he finally said. "But I'm afraid I must decline. You see, killing you quickly would be merciful. And I'm not feeling particularly merciful tonight." He nodded to one of his men. The guard stepped forward, raising his weapon toward Zamora. And Taegun moved. It was instinct more than strategy, years of training and violence coiling into a single explosive moment. He crossed the distance before anyone could react, his body colliding with the guard, the weapon discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. Chaos erupted. Shots were fired. Men shouted. Bodies fell. Taegun fought through the pandemonium with brutal efficiency, taking down anyone between him and Zamora. He reached her just as Hyun-soo pressed a gun to her head. "Stop." The word froze everything. Taegun stood 3 feet away, breathing hard, blood on his knuckles. Around them, the survivors of his assault had their weapons trained on him. "One more step," Hyun-soo said, "and I end this now. You end her, you lose your leverage." "Maybe I don't care about leverage anymore." Hyun-soo's hand was steady, his eyes cold. "Maybe I just want to watch you lose someone else." "Then watch." A new voice. Hyun-soo turned just as Min-kyu emerged from the shadows behind him, leading a team that had infiltrated through routes Hyun-soo hadn't secured. "You followed me," Taegun said quietly. "You didn't honestly think we'd let you do this alone?" For a fraction of a second, Hyun-soo's attention wavered. It was enough. Taegun lunged forward, knocking the gun away from Zamora's head in the same motion that brought Hyun-soo to the ground. They struggled. 2 men who had hated each other for nearly a decade, finally confronting each other without intermediaries or proxies. Taegun was stronger, younger, fueled by a rage that had been building since the day they put his daughter in the ground. But he didn't kill him. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. Every fiber of his being screamed for the satisfaction of ending this man's life, of making him pay for every moment of suffering he had caused. But Zamora was watching. And he had promised himself, promised her, that he would be more than the monster the world thought he was. "It's over," he said, his hands locked around Hyun-soo's throat, applying just enough pressure to make his point. "You've lost everything. Your organization is destroyed. Your allies have abandoned you. And I could kill you right now with my bare hands." Hyun-soo's eyes bulged, but he couldn't speak. But I'm not going to. Taegun's voice was deadly calm. Because death would be too easy. Too quick. I want you to live, Hyeonsu. I want you to spend the rest of your miserable life knowing that you're nothing. That everything you built has been taken away. That you're powerless. He released his grip, letting Hyeonsu gasp for air. Minkyu. Take him. Authorities will be very interested in the evidence we've gathered about his money laundering operations. Sir. Minkyu signaled his team, who moved forward to secure Hyeonsu. Taegun turned to Zamora. She was still bound to the chair, trembling, tears streaming down her face. He cut her restraints with hands that shook despite his best efforts to steady them. Are you hurt? No. No, her voice broke. You came. I will always come. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Always. Do you understand? There is no distance I won't cross. No enemy I won't face. Nothing in this world that will stop me from reaching you. She buried her face against his chest, her tears soaking through his shirt, her hands clutching the fabric like she would never let go. Around them, his people finished securing the site. Hyeonsu was led away in restraints, his empire crumbling with every step he took. The war that had threatened to consume everything was finally, definitively over. And in the center of the chaos, two people held each other like survivors of a shipwreck, grateful beyond words to be alive. The aftermath was exhausting. There were debriefings with Min-kyu and his security team. Statements to carefully selected authorities who would handle Hyeonsu's prosecution without exposing too much about Taegun's own operations. Medical examinations to ensure Zamora hadn't sustained any injuries during her captivity. By the time they finally returned to a secondary estate, the Hanam-dong property would need extensive repairs. Dawn was breaking over Seoul. Zamora stood at the window of the guest suite, watching the city come to life. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Hyeonsu's cold smile, felt the metal of the gun pressing against her temple. You should rest. She turned to find Taegun in the doorway. He had showered and changed, but the exhaustion on his face matched her own. I can't seem to stop my mind, she admitted. He crossed to stand beside her at the window. For a long moment neither of them spoke. When I was 17, he said quietly, my father was killed by a rival organization. I watched it happen. Couldn't do anything to stop it. Zamora looked at him, seeing layers of pain she hadn't known existed. 4 years afterward I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I was back in that moment. Helpless. Watching someone I loved die while I did nothing. How did you survive it? I built walls. Convinced myself that if I was strong enough, powerful enough, I would never be helpless again. He turned to face her. But walls don't protect you from pain. They just trap you inside it. And now I'm trying to learn a different way. His silver-gray eyes held hers. With you. If you'll have me. She reached up, touching his face the way she had that first night in Lagos. The stubble was rougher now, the lines around his eyes deeper with fatigue, but the vulnerability in his expression was the same. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Even after everything you've seen? Especially after everything I've seen. She stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. You could have killed him, Taegun. No one would have blamed you. But you didn't. I wanted to. I know. That's what makes your choice matter. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. You're not the monster you think you are. You're a man who has done terrible things and beautiful things, and I'm not naive enough to pretend the terrible things don't exist. But I choose to stay anyway. I choose you. Something broke open in his expression. A wall crumbling, a door opening, a heart finally allowing itself to feel. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. After everything they had survived, gentleness seemed inadequate. It was fierce and desperate and achingly honest. A declaration made with lips and breath and the trembling of bodies too long denied. When they finally pulled apart they were both breathing hard. Stay with me, he said. Not a command. A plea. Not just tonight. Not just until the danger passes. Stay with me because you want to. Because you believe we could build something real. I do believe that. Then say yes. She smiled. The first genuine smile she'd managed since before the attack. Yes. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of healing. They stayed at the secondary estate while the Hanam-dong property was repaired, And during that time, something shifted between them. The constant proximity, the shared trauma, the knowledge that they had faced death together and survived. It created a bond that went deeper than anything Zamora had experienced before. She learned the rhythm of his days. The early morning meetings with Min-kyu. The hours spent on legitimate business operations that required his attention. The quiet afternoons when he would find her wherever she was sketching and simply sit nearby, reading or working, existing in the same space without needing to fill the silence. And she learned the rhythm of his nights. The way he sometimes woke gasping, trapped in dreams he wouldn't talk about. The way he reached for her in those moments, needing the physical confirmation that she was real, that she was there, that he hadn't lost her too. She held him through those moments. It was, she realized, the most intimate thing they shared. More intimate than the kisses that had become frequent. More intimate than the careful progression of physical closeness as they learned each other's bodies. Holding someone through their nightmares required a trust that couldn't be faked or rushed. And slowly, gradually, the nightmares became less frequent. "Tell me about Soo-min," she asked one evening as they sat together in the garden. He was quiet for a long moment. This topic, his daughter, was the wound that never fully healed, and she understood if he couldn't discuss it. But he surprised her. She was born on April 15th. The most perfect day I'd ever experienced. His voice was soft, reflective. Her mother and I weren't together. We'd had a brief relationship that ended before she knew she was pregnant. But when Soo-min arrived, nothing else mattered. "Did you raise her?" "Her mother did, mostly. She was a good woman, better than I deserved. She knew what I was and tried to keep Soo-min away from that world." His jaw tightened. "But I visited whenever I could. Spent time with her. Made sure they were provided for. She sounds wonderful." She was. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Stubborn too. He got that from me. Once she decided she wanted something, nothing could change her mind." "What happened to her mother?" "She died a few months after Soo-min. They said it was an accident, a car crash. But I've never been sure." He turned to face Zamora. "That's when I became who I am now. The man the world calls the ghost of Seoul. I promised myself I would build something so powerful that no one could ever hurt me again." "Did it work?" "I thought it did. For a while." He reached out, taking her hand. "But then you walked into that corridor at the gala, and I realized all my power couldn't protect me from you." She smiled slightly. "I'm that dangerous? You're that important." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I spent years believing I didn't deserve to love anyone again. That love was a weakness I couldn't afford. But you changed that, Zamora. You made me believe that maybe, I could have something more than this empire." Her heart swelled with an emotion she wasn't quite ready to name. "I want that," she said softly. "Something more. With you. Even knowing what I am. Even knowing." She moved closer until their foreheads touched. "I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm just asking you to try. I can do that." And there, in the garden as twilight gathered, they held each other and imagined a future that neither of them had dared to dream before. Amarachi arrived 2 weeks later. Zamora met her at the airport, anxious about the reunion. So much had happened since she'd left Lagos. So much had changed about who she was and what she wanted. But when Amarachi stepped through the arrival gates, all Zamora felt was love. "You look different," her sister said, studying her face with those sharp, assessing eyes. "I feel different. He's changed you. We've changed each other." They walked to the waiting car in silence, the driver holding the door as they climbed into the back seat. It wasn't until they were moving through Seoul traffic that Amarachi spoke again. "I was so angry when I heard what happened. That he put you in danger. That his enemies almost—" She stopped, collecting herself. "I thought I would never forgive him. And now I've seen the reports. What he did to Hyunsu's organization. How thoroughly he dismantled the people who hurt his daughter 8 years ago." Amarachi turned to look at her sister. "He did that for you. To protect you. To make sure no one would ever threaten you again. It wasn't just for me. It was for Soo-min too." "Yes. But you were the catalyst." Amarachi's expression softened. "I've worked for him for years, see. I've seen how he operates. He doesn't do anything without strategic purpose. But when it comes to you, strategy goes out the window. It's just a man in love." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, their ripples spreading outward. He hasn't said that, Zamora admitted. The word love. He talks around it. About wanting me to stay. About building something together. But he's never actually said. He doesn't know how. Amarachi's voice was gentle. He spent so long believing love was weakness that he forgot how to speak the language. Then how do I know it's real? By his actions. By the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. By the fact that he dismantled an entire criminal empire to keep you safe. Amarachi smiled. Words are easy, little sister. What he's done for you is hard. And far more valuable. The dinner that evening was a careful affair. Taegun and Amarachi had a complicated history. Employer and employee, yes, but also bound by the tragedy of Sumin's final hours. They had never discussed it directly, had maintained a professional distance that allowed them both to function. But Zamora's presence changed the equation. I need to thank you, Taegun said after the main course had been served. For what you did 8 years ago. For being with Sumin when... Don't. Amarachi's voice was firm but not unkind. I did what any person with a heart would do. He was a child. He was scared. She needed someone to hold her hand. You did more than that. You made her final moments less terrifying. You gave her comfort when I couldn't be there. His silver-gray eyes were bright with emotion he rarely showed. I've never known how to express what that meant to me. You've expressed it. Amarachi gestured around them, at the estate, the luxury, the life she had built with his support. Every opportunity you've given me. Every door you've opened. I knew why you were doing it even if we never talked about it. I should have talked about it. I should have. Should have doesn't matter now. She leaned forward. What matters is what happens next. With my sister. With the life you're building together. Taegun glanced at Zamora then back at Amarachi. I love her. The words came out raw, unpolished, like he was speaking a language he'd forgotten. I know, Amarachi said softly. I don't know how to do this. How to be what she deserves. I've spent so long being something else. Then learn. The same way you learned everything else. One step at a time. Amarachi stood, moving around the table to place a hand on his shoulder. You're not the man you were when I first started working for you. And you won't be the same man in another year. That's what growth looks like. He turned to Zamora. And you, make sure he doesn't retreat into his old habits. Try. When things get hard, when he's scared, his instinct will be to put up walls. Don't let him. I won't. Amarachi nodded, satisfied. Good. Now I believe there's dessert. The tension broke, replaced by something warmer. And as they finished the meal, laughing and talking like a family that had found each other against impossible odds, Zamora felt the future crystallizing around them. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was exactly what she wanted. The proposal came 3 months later. It wasn't planned, or at least, it wasn't planned in the elaborate way Taegun usually approached significant events. There was no restaurant reservation, no choreographed moment, no ring hidden in a champagne glass. There was just the two of them, sitting on the balcony of the Hanamdong estate, newly repaired and more beautiful than before, watching the sun set over Seoul. I talked to my lawyers today, Taegun said, breaking the comfortable silence. About what? About restructuring my holdings, creating legitimate distance between my business interests and other operations. Zamora turned to look at him. This was new, he rarely discussed the specifics of his work and never with this level of detail. Why? Because I want a different life. He met her eyes. Not completely different. I can't walk away from everything I've built. There are people who depend on me, structures that would collapse without oversight. But I can change the shape of it. Make it cleaner. More defensible. Defensible against what? Against a future where I have something worth protecting. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Against a future with you. Zamora's heart stopped. Taegun. I know I'm not what anyone would choose. I have blood on my hands. Enemies who will never stop looking for weakness. A past that will always cast shadows on the present. He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the dying sunlight. A simple band with a single diamond, elegant rather than ostentatious. But I love you, Zamora. I love you in a way I thought I'd never love anyone again. And I'm asking, begging, for the chance to spend the rest of my life proving that love is real. She couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Every emotion she'd ever felt seemed to crash together in her chest, overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. You don't have to answer now, he continued, his voice unsteady. I know this is sudden. I know there are 1,000 reasons to say no. Yes. The word came out before she could second-guess it. He stared at her. Yes. Yes. She laughed, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll spend my life with you. Yes to all of it, every terrifying, wonderful, impossible piece of it. He kissed her then, fierce and desperate and full of a joy he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. When they finally pulled apart, he slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Maybe not. She smiled through her tears. But you have me anyway. The wedding was small by design. Taegun had the resources for a lavish affair, an event that would make headlines and demonstrate his power to the world. But that wasn't what either of them wanted. Instead, they married in a private ceremony at a traditional hanok in Jeonju, with only their closest people in attendance. Min-kyu stood at Taegun's side, his usually stoic face softened by something that might have been happiness. Amarachi stood at Zamora's, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her sister pledge her life to a man they'd both once feared. Mrs. Ngozi Ease had flown from Lagos for the occasion, her presence a bridge between Zamora's past and her future. She had wept during the ceremony and lectured Taegun for 20 minutes afterward about the proper way to care for a Nigerian wife. He had listened attentively, taking notes. You're terrifying her, Zamora had whispered, watching the exchange. She's magnificent, he'd replied. I intend to learn everything she'll teach me. And he had. In the months that followed, Taegun proved himself a student of everything related to Zamora's heritage. He learned Nigerian dishes, badly at first, then with increasing competence. He studied Igbo phrases, determined to speak to her in the language of her parents. He filled their home with art from African creators, not as tokens but as genuine expressions of appreciation. You don't have to do all this, she told him one evening, watching him struggle through a recipe for jollof rice. Yes, I do. He looked up from the pot, his usually immaculate appearance disrupted by flour on his cheek. You left everything to be with me. Your country. Your community. Your familiar world. The least I can do is bring pieces of that world here. I didn't leave because I had to. I left because I chose you. I know. He set down the spoon, crossing to take her hands. But love isn't just about grand gestures. It's about small daily choices. And I choose to honor where you come from every day in every way I can. She kissed the flour from his cheek. The rice is burning. I know. They laughed as he scrambled to rescue their dinner, and the sound filled their home like music. The baby arrived 2 years later. A girl. They named her Soo-yoon, combining Korean and the essence of new beginnings. She had her father's silver-gray eyes and her mother's dark curls, a beautiful fusion of the worlds that had come together to create her. Taegun, who had faced down crime lords and survived assassination attempts, was utterly undone by the sight of his daughter. She's so small, he whispered, cradling her in arms that seemed suddenly too large. How can anything be this small? She'll grow. Zamora watched him from the hospital bed, exhausted but incandescent with joy. They do that, babies. Growing is sort of their primary function. What if I break her? You won't. What if she hates me? When she's older. When she learns what I've done. She'll know what you've done for her. How you changed your life. How you built something different so she could have a future without shadows. Zamora reached out, touching his arm. She'll know she's loved, Taegun. That's what matters. He looked up, his silver-gray eyes bright with tears he never would have shown anyone else. I thought I would never have this again. After Sumin. I thought that part of me was dead. It wasn't dead. Just waiting. For what? For you to be ready. For us to find each other. She smiled, exhausted and radiant and utterly at peace. For exactly this moment. He looked back down at the baby in his arms. This impossible miracle, this second chance he had never expected. I'm going to do better this time, he said quietly. I'm going to be there for every moment. Every first step, every first word, every single day of her life. I know you will. I promise you, Zamora. Both of you. I will never let anything hurt this family. And there, in a hospital room in Seoul, surrounded by the quiet hum of medical equipment and the soft breathing of their newborn daughter, Kwon Tae-gun made the most important vow of his life. This time he would keep it. 5 years passed. The changes came gradually, so slowly that they were almost invisible from day to day. But looking back, Zamora could see how far they had traveled. Tae-gun's legitimate businesses had expanded significantly, providing cover for the gradual transformation of his other interests. He wasn't naive enough to believe he could simply walk away from his past. Too many people depended on him, too many structures would collapse. But he had created distance. Layers of separation. A firewall between his family and the darkness that had once defined his entire existence. Min-kyu had taken on more responsibility, handling the day-to-day operations that had once consumed Tae-gun's every waking moment. Their relationship had evolved from employer and right hand to something closer to brothers, bound by decades of shared history and mutual trust. Hyun was thriving. She had inherited her father's intensity and her mother's artistic eye, spending hours drawing elaborate scenes that covered the walls of her room. She was fearless and curious and utterly adored by everyone who met her. And she had no idea who her father really was. Not yet. That truth, how to tell it, when to reveal it, what pieces to share and what to bury, was a conversation Tae-gun and Zamora had been having for years. There were no easy answers. No perfect solutions. But there was time. Time to figure it out. Time to build the foundation that would support whatever truths eventually emerged. Daddy. Soo-yoon came running across the garden, her dark curls bouncing, her silver-gray eyes bright with excitement. Mommy says we're going to visit Auntie Alma tomorrow. Tae-gun scooped her up, settling her on his hip with practiced ease. Did she? And what else did Mommy say? That Uncle Min-kyu is coming too, and Grandma Ngozi is flying from Lagos, and we're going to have a big party. That's a lot of people. Because we're celebrating. Soo-yoon's expression became very serious. A 5-year-old explaining something important. Mommy's new show. All her paintings in a big gallery. She says it's a very special thing. Tae-gun looked across the garden to where Zamora stood, watching them with an expression of such contentment that it made his chest ache. She had become one of Seoul's most celebrated artists over the past few years. Her unique fusion of African and Korean influences resonating with audiences who had never seen anything like it before. The upcoming exhibition was her largest yet, featuring works that traced the journey of her life, from Lagos to Seoul, from uncertainty to love, from solitude to family. It is a very special thing, he agreed. Your mommy is very talented. I know. Soo-yoon nodded sagely. I'm going to be an artist too when I grow up. Mommy's teaching me. Is she? Yes. She says art is how we tell stories. And I have lots of stories to tell. Tae-gun's heart swelled with love so intense it bordered on pain. You do, he said softly. You have the best stories. And I can't wait to hear every single one of them. The exhibition opening was everything Zamora had dreamed. The gallery was packed with Seoul's artistic elite. Critics, collectors, fellow artists who had come to celebrate one of their own. Her work hung on the walls like windows into her soul. Vibrant colors, bold lines, images that captured the emotional journey she had taken to arrive at this moment. And in the center of it all, the largest piece in the collection. A painting of a family. Not photorealistic. Zamora's style was too distinctive for that. But recognizable. A tall man with silver-gray eyes and dark hair, his arm around a woman with warm brown skin and natural curls. Between them, a little girl who seemed to glow with joy. The painting was called Found. It's beautiful, Tae-gun said quietly, standing beside her as guests milled around them. It's us. I know. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. I still can't believe this is my life. Our life. Our life. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her wedding ring. Thank you. For what? For everything. For staying when you could have run. For believing in me when I gave you every reason not to. For giving me Seon. For, his voice caught. For making me believe I deserved to be happy. Zamora turned to face him fully, cupping his face in her hands the way she had that very first night in Lagos, when everything between them had begun. You've earned your happiness, Tae-gun. Every day in every choice you make, you've earned it. Because of you. Because of us. She smiled, her eyes bright with tears that weren't entirely about the exhibition. We earned it together. He kissed her then in the middle of the crowded gallery, with cameras flashing and guests watching and their entire world transformed into something neither of them had dared to imagine. When they pulled apart, Suyun was tugging at Zamora's dress. "Mommy. Auntie Amma says the painting sold. Someone wanted to buy it." Zamora laughed, wiping her eyes. "Did they? Which one?" "The big one. Of us." Suyun pointed at Found. "But Auntie Amma said it wasn't for sale." "That's right." Zamora crouched down to her daughter's level. "Some things are too important to sell. Because it's our family? Because it's our story. And our story belongs to us." Suyun nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then she spotted something across the room and went racing off to investigate, her boundless energy propelling her through the crowd. Taegun watched her go, his expression soft. "She's so much like Sumin," he said quietly. "The curiosity. The fearlessness. She's also very much herself." "I know." He turned back to Zamora. "But sometimes when I look at her I feel like I've been given a second chance to get it right. To protect someone I love. To be the father I couldn't be before." "You are." Zamora took his hand again. "Every single day. You're exactly the father she needs. Because you taught me how. No. Because you chose to learn." She squeezed his fingers. "That's the difference, Taegun. That's always been the difference. You chose love even when it was terrifying. Even when it meant changing everything you'd built." He was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. "Then, I would choose it again. 1,000 times. 1,000,000. If it led me back to you." The gallery buzzed around them. Art critics discussing technique, collectors negotiating prices, friends and family celebrating together. But for Zamora and Taegun, there was only this moment. This life they had built. This love that had survived storms and secrets and the weight of impossible histories. "Come on," she said, tugging him toward the crowd. "There are people who want to meet you. The mysterious husband of the famous artist." "I'm not mysterious. You're the most mysterious person I've ever known." He grinned. "And I love you anyway. Anyway. Always." She rose up on her toes, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "Now stop being broody and come socialize." He allowed himself to be led into the crowd, and as he went, Taegun marveled at the journey that had brought him here. From the ghost of Seoul to this. From isolation to love. From a man who had lost everything to a man who had been given everything back. He didn't deserve it. He knew that. Some part of him would always know that. But Zamora believed he was worthy. And for her, for their daughter, he would spend the rest of his life becoming the man she believed him to be. Epilogue. 10 years later. The estate in Hanamdong had grown over the years. New wings had been added to accommodate an expanding family. Suyun was 15 now, all awkward grace and artistic passion, on the verge of applying to art schools that would nurture her extraordinary talent. Her younger brother, Junho, was 12, quieter than his sister but with their father's silver-gray eyes and a mind that processed the world in patterns most people couldn't see. Zamora stood at the window of her studio, watching her children play in the garden below. Junho was reading, always reading, while Suyun sketched something in her ever-present notebook. "They're getting so big." She turned to find Taegun in the doorway, his expression soft with the contentment he wore more easily these days. The years had silvered his temples and added lines to his face, but he was still the most striking man she'd ever seen. "Too fast," she agreed. "Suyun starts university interviews next month." "I know." He crossed to stand beside her. "She wants to study in Paris. She's wanted that for years." "I know." He sighed. "I just hoped she'd change her mind. She's 15, Taegun. She's not going anywhere for at least 2 more years." 2 years. He said it like a prison sentence. Zamora laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "You're going to be impossible when they actually leave, aren't you?" "Completely." They stood together, watching their children. These impossible miracles that had somehow emerged from a relationship that had begun with misunderstanding and danger and a name whispered in a storm. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "Which night?" "The night I heard you say Amarachi's name. The night I ran." He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes." "What do you think about?" "How close I came to losing you." His arm tightened around her. How different everything would be if you hadn't let me explain. I almost didn't. I know. I was so convinced that you loved her. That I was just a substitute. She shook her head. It seems absurd now looking back. It wasn't absurd. You heard something that hurt and you protected yourself. I would have done the same. Would you? Yes. He turned to face her fully. One of the things I love most about you is your strength. You don't wait for someone else to fix your problems. You take action. Even when that action is running away to Lagos. I prefer to think of it as a strategic retreat. Of course you do. They smiled at each other. The easy intimacy of two people who had spent 15 years learning each other's rhythms. Mommy. Daddy. Seun's voice floated up from the garden. Auntie Alma's here. They looked down to see Amarachi's car pulling into the drive, followed by another vehicle carrying Mrs. Ngozi Ease, now approaching 80 but still sharp and formidable. The whole family, Zamora said. The whole family. Taegun pressed a kiss to her temple. Ready. Always. They went down to greet their loved ones, to celebrate another ordinary day in their extraordinary life. And as she watched Taegun embrace her sister, as she felt Mrs. Ease's weathered hand clasp her own, as she saw her children laughing with the people who loved them most, Zamora understood with perfect clarity why she had stayed. Why she had chosen this man. Why she would choose him again every single day for the rest of her life. Not because he was perfect. Not because he was safe. But because he was hers. And she was his. And together they had built something that neither of them had believed possible. A love that survived. A family that flourished. A future that shone brighter than either of them had dared to dream. The end. Please like, share and subscribe. And comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has traveled.